We have the D&D Player's Handbook. Is it groundbreaking or more of the same?
I don't know, you tell me.
So, I have a confession to make. I've had the Dungeons & Dragons 2024 Player's Handbook for several weeks now. Wizards of the Coast provided us with a copy ahead of our interview with Jeremy Crawford, and I had a pretty good chance to take a long look at the book. Now, before we get started about what the D&D Player's Handbook is and what it isn't, I do want to talk about the perspective that I took when I read through this book. I've only played about a half dozen or so games of D&D as a player. Now, I've run like 1,000 sessions as a DM, so it's not like I'm unfamiliar with 5th edition, but my experiences with character building and running a character, it's rather limited. Still, it's not like I'm unfamiliar with the 2014 Player's Handbook. I've read it plenty of times and I've helped plenty of players sort out their character options. But I want everyone to understand that I read the Player's Handbook from the perspective of someone who runs the game instead of someone who sits on the other side of the DM screen. So when you hear me talk about some of the changes to classes and not getting really upset about it, it's probably because I'm not, used to having an ability that I use every single time I'm in combat. So, with all of that out of the way, how is the new Player's Handbook? Well, the new rules revisions for D&D contains numerous small improvements to the game that should make the playing experience better, but it's still 5th edition, for better or worse. The new Player's Handbook comes with a reworked character building system, touched up spells, and a handful of new subsystems. And there is plenty of material that veteran players will pore over and compare to the previous set of rules. Almost all of the changes are improvements to existing rules or fixes of frustration points instead of truly new material. And that makes sense given the framing of this new book as a rules revision instead of a new edition. However, it's understandable that the excitement level for this book and the other core rulebooks are a little bit reduced compared to what we would get from a new edition. Now, as I mentioned before, the 2024 Player's Handbook, it is an improvement from its 2014 predecessor in almost every single way. The book is more accessible, it has better art, it has a better layout, it has clearer rules. This time, the designers of the book understand that the Player's Handbook is a gateway to the millions of players that will likely look at the game at some point in the next decade, and it lays out the chapters with a funnel approach that first explains what the game is and how the game works in much clearer terms than before. Plus, every class, and I do mean every single class, I'm looking at you, Paladin and Ranger, have gotten a glow up of some kind with even more abilities meant to be more versatile and give players more to do during a round of combat than the same thing over and over again.
Producer Pete here with a counterpoint from the player perspective. Paladins may have needed a nerf as their previous version of smite mechanics made them melee supernovas that at mid to high level could often one-round serious threats by themselves on good rolls and simply output too much damage. But the Ranger is once again left as a sort of red-headed stepchild of the character classes in core 2024 for no real reason. They gain access to more spells and more spell slots, but they still aren't really a spell casting class, and the choice to make Rangers more spell focused just makes their problem with split stats even worse, as now they really need both a very high dex and a very high wisdom to operate at the full capacity of this new, more spell-focused version of Rangers. To make matters worse, their primary competition for ranged martial DPS, fighters and rogues, both got substantially better, with the rogue in particular having now the ability to get advantage on ranged basically at will, making their ranged DPS far outshine the Ranger, even at low levels. And while the Ranger has more spells, his casting eats up basically every single one of his bonus actions every turn, and has a lot of conflicts, because so many of his spells are bonus action concentration, like Ensnaring Strike, Hunter's Mark, Guidance, and so on. So you're now competing with your own concentration spells to do anything without burning your extra spell slots, and you effectively just wind up casting Hunter's Mark and upkeeping it for the whole game and hoping for the best. So while Christian might not think the Ranger is a problem, I would say it might be the weakest Ranger we've ever seen in D&D. But let's get back to Christian and talk about the other winners and losers in the Player's Handbook 2024.
Now, many of the changes seen in the 2024 Player's Handbook were either already implemented via different expansions or exist in the same design space as third-party material. For instance, the crafting system found in the book. It's good, but it's a better version of the one found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. The Weapon Mastery System, which is a new subsystem never seen in 5e, or at least in Wizards of the Coast produced 5e material, is pretty similar to the weapons trait system found in Pathfinder or in the weapon descriptions found in D&D 3.5 edition. The focus on backgrounds as a core part of character design, that was already kind of explored somewhat in third-party material for 5th edition, such as ancestry and culture, an alternative to race in 5e. Even some of the improvements to class abilities are basically improved bits from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but benefiting from a few extra years of playtesting and, just seeing how that works. Now, given that high fantasy games have dominated the tabletop RPG space and D&D has encouraged homebrewing and refinement of the rules for years, it makes sense that there are lots of comparisons to the changes made in this book. But the biggest changes here tend to err on the safe side. It's stuff that already works, and we know it already works because we've seen it implemented successfully elsewhere. And we just got new versions of that. And that's not a knock on the designers, by the way. That's just simply, a reality. Other people have, it's hard to make something totally brand new in this space. Now, on the plus side, I do appreciate that the designers have cleared up a lot of the frustrations from 5th edition. Grappling rules have been improved, summoning spells have been tweaked, and some conditions have been revised to make more sense. A lot of the spells have gotten quality of life improvements, which should open up builds more because players won't use the same handful of spells or abilities over and over and over again. For instance, True Strike, that's now a viable spell instead of some joke spell that is just a dead spell in the Player's Handbook that no one actually wants to use. We can also see how game designers future-proofed the game by standardizing class progressions and merging together some rule subsystems so that they can better build on the rule system in the future. Now, some people will complain about the homogenization of the class progressions and feel that species are now too similar, but I honestly think that a lot of the changes they've made to standardize stuff in this Player's Handbook will really benefit the game in the long run. Now, ultimately, the 2024 Player's Handbook, it's a clear upgrade for D&D. The entry point for the game is better than it was 10 years ago, and the rules are easier to understand and improved in countless small ways. And we'll talk about all of those countless small ways later and in, various other videos. But these changes make the current version of Dungeons & Dragons a better game, and the designer should be acknowledged for not needlessly damaging a rule set that has ushered in a wave of popularity for the franchise. But, as a veteran DM, nothing about the new Player's Handbook excites me, or makes me want to play Dungeons & Dragons more than I already did. Now, to be fair, I already want to play Dungeons & Dragons. I think 5th edition is perfectly fine, and I'm more excited to see what things like the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual brings, because I think we'll get some substantial improvements there. I personally would have wanted to see something a little bit more exciting or bold or new rather than more of the same, but I also appreciate why Dungeons & Dragons played it safe. This is more than just a fresh coat of paint, but it's less than a fresh start for Dungeons & Dragons. It's more like a version 1.1 of 5th edition and pushes the game towards familiar ground as it begins a new era. However, as I said before, I think that the foundation that the Player's Handbook and assumably the other core rulebooks have laid could open up the game more in the future, but we'll talk about that in a later video. Anyways, that's our early review of the Player's Handbook. Let us know what you think in the comment section. Don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons.